Alrighty. Yeah, let's talk about Qatar. We're all poor, haha, literally. Not literally. Okay, so recently in Qatar, they've been holding the World Cup. Obviously, this has been hot news. The World Cup in general is a giant media event and a giant, spectacle. Great way for capitalists to make a whole bunch of money, similar to the Olympics. But this year, a lot of players have been wearing pride flags and have been wearing a lot of pro LGBTQ patches or clothing or whatever else bearing the flag to protest of the Qatari government and their discriminatory laws against LGBTQ people. They don't allow like gay marriage. The critique that's been made of this is that Qatar has an extremely exploitative system of labor, and specifically migrant labor, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But the Kafala system basically allows for Qatar to be a country built on almost exclusively migrant labor, immigrant labor, and it puts them in a situation of borderline slavery, like involuntary servitude to the Qatari landlords. So we're going to talk about that in a sec, but here's Richard Medhurst's initial reporting on what's going on in Qatar. Oh, sorry. So I didn't finish what the critique of the Americans is. The critique is that they care about social issues, and trying to impose American cultural values on the countries in the Middle East or in West Asia. But they don't care about, exploitative labor practices or the way that Qatar aids imperialism, things like this.
Surprised to hear this from Piers Morgan, of all people. So let me just play the clip.
Who is morally clean enough to actually host a World Cup? Are we? Are we the country that illegally invaded Iraq, which then started a 20-year reign of terror by ISIS? Are we morally clean enough to host a World Cup? I mean, I just think it's fraught with hypocrisy.
They're saying that, Qatar is not fit to host the World Cup. Right now, they're focusing on gay rights. The thing that I remember about Qatar, which was really controversial years ago already, was that they were using migrant workers to build the stadiums. They had all these people coming in from Bangladesh, from all over Asia to Qatar to build the stadiums, because you have to do this many years in advance. And they were taking their passports, so they couldn't leave. 6,500 migrant workers have died in Qatar since the World Cup was awarded. Everybody knew that they bought their way into hosting it, right? You have all these oil sheikhs who are running around just like throwing dollars into FIFA's pockets, which FIFA already, was corrupt as hell. And this is one of the reasons. It was so obvious. I understand, like, there are legitimate criticisms to be made of Qatar. I just made them for you as well. But I agree with Piers Morgan for once about what he's saying, that, you start saying, well, that country is not morally okay. Like, who are we to speak? If you want to judge our history, I think the UK has done a million things worse than Qatar and still does them. It's not that long ago. It's just a few decades that, gay people, homosexuals were still being oppressed in the UK. This is relatively new that you have progressive legislation that's been enacted in support of gay rights. But it's not that long ago that these countries, the UK, the US, were oppressing gay people. And now they want to turn around and point the finger at others after they gave them the thing. That's the root of the problem here. It's corruption. It's because these countries buy their way into these things. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they want to portray themselves as these really prestigious, futuristic countries. And it's all from the oil money. The responsibility does not lie with the fans on who gets the World Cup. The responsibility lies with FIFA. If they actually care about these things, they care about gay rights, they care about migrant workers, their human rights, they shouldn't have given it to Qatar in the first place.
It's all from oil money and from the labor of those migrant workers, and obviously the two are deeply intertwined. But I don't know, Carlos gave me a statistic earlier, something like 80% of Qatar's population is migrants. And the way the kafala system works, or the way that it used to work at least, is, you know, if your parents lived in Qatar, if you're a second generation Qatari, you have access to social programs, government social programs, basically, where you get a tiny fraction of the oil wealth. And then obviously there's the top dogs, these giant, ridiculous oil oligarchs, the richest people in the world, pretty much, who you hear Joe Rogan talking about all the time, actually. And this kafala system basically locks migrant workers into a contract with native Qataris, people who are benefiting from these social programs. And it makes those native Qataris basically their managers for the bosses, being the giant oligarchs, as well as their landlords. So they're managing the labor and owning the land, and, you know, that these migrant workers live on. So it's a middle class compared to the giant oil oligarchs, right? But it's still this oppressive, managerial, non-productive laboring class in Qatar. Yeah, and I mean, but that's not to say the working conditions for all native Qataris is great, or there aren't tons of exploited native Qataris, you know. And if anything, it's a way to divide, you know, the main productive workers in that region, in that country. You have these migrant workers and then native Qataris. You keep them divided by what they get from the government in terms of social programs, despite the fact that like 80% of the country is not from Qatar, and makes it harder for them to struggle against the giant oil oligarchs, you know, see what they have in common. And, you know, I have a special connection to Qatar because I had a bunch of buddies on my college wrestling team who joined the military. And obviously I keep them anonymous, but they joined the military for free college, and they were told they wouldn't be deployed, and they were lied to by the recruiter, and they got deployed to Qatar, you know, basically just to guard the oil, to be the stewards of the oil that makes a lot of money for Western multinationals and those Qatari oil oligarchs. And probably to prevent an uprising as well, you know, oversee that system of exploitation, that system of extracting labor value from migrant workers. So here's from the international, what's it called? The International something of Labor, the ILO, International Labor Organization. I don't know. It's some branch of the UN, but International Labor Organization. Yeah, it's a sector of the UN that was founded in the early 1900s. But this is how they recruit these workers. And there's, you know, I don't know if all these UN reports about the kafala system are necessarily negative, but there's predatory recruitment practices. The working conditions are terrible. What's ironic about the World Cup thing is that a lot of these migrant workers actually died making the stadiums that these players are playing in. And the working conditions are notoriously horrible for these migrant workers who are, you know, as I said, basically they're in a contract with their landlord and their manager, their employer. So, you know, it's basically involuntary servitude, borderline slavery. They own where you live, what you do, control what you do, and they make the working conditions terrible, and they don't care if you die. So, you know, it's not that protesting LGBTQ discrimination is a bad thing. But, you know, these Westerners going into Qatar and saying, why don't you have the same political ideals that we do in the West? Why don't you have the same social values that we do in the West, the same cultural values that we do, and implement those into your system of governance? You know, why aren't those same people who are saying that talking about the migrant system, the kafala system, the workers who died making the literal stadium that they're playing in? And it shows, I think it shows that it's largely performative in a lot of ways. The media is covering it like crazy. You know, it's a really popular statement to make in the U.S. right now, at least in a lot of areas like California or whatever else, to make a pro-LGBTQ statement. And again, nothing wrong with that. But let's talk about the kafala system. Let's talk about the exploitative system of migrant labor. Let's talk about the people who are buried under the stadium that you're playing in because they died creating it. And I found this short TikTok that I find funny. Okay, I'll check it out. I don't know. What do people in the chat think of that? Do people find any of the criticisms of these athletes, of these Western athletes, to be homophobic? Like, is it homophobic to criticize this and say focus on the Kafala system? Is it imperialistic to say that other countries have to adopt the same LGBTQ cultural values as us? You know, I think it could go either way. It's a sensitive topic, but very interesting to think about. See if I have anything written about it. Yeah, I don't know. We never criticize countries for how they organize labor. And I agree with Richard Medhurst and Piers Morgan's critique too. Like, who then is morally pure enough to host the World Cup? Because we played the videos on our show like about a week ago. I'm sorry. At least I didn't throw my hat. But we played literally about a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and Joe Biden in like 2008 through 2012 saying they were against gay marriage, and that marriage is between a man and a woman, and marriage is ordained by God, and that should be the law in America. So as Richard Medhurst is saying, like, this isn't even something that we had in the United States a while back. This is something that had to be fought for by LGBTQ people in the U.S. They had to struggle for their rights. But, you know, we're going to impose our values on other countries and criticize other countries for doing the exact same thing that we did for 100 years or whatever. So, I don't know. I mean, yeah, their views on LGBTQ is wrong, agreed, but showing up to the gates of the cup with an LGBTQ shirt and getting turned away and then being shocked by it and making a video, yeah, right. Did it start out with a video? Is that how the protest started? Was it a video of like a fan trying to do it who got turned away, and then the athletes started doing it, or what? I don't know. I feel like my fear is that there's ultimately people using it nefariously. Like, that's the thing. None of our criticisms of woke imperialism are like us being anti-LGBTQ or being anti-oppressed identity groups or anti-freedom. You know, all of it is the fact that you have to recognize capital, and the capitalist imperialists are going to weaponize whatever they can. You know, whatever parts of the culture they can weaponize to make people support imperialism and capitalism and not fight in their own interest for socialism, they're going to use it. You know, so if they can divide people with cultural issues and social issues that are covered by the media nonstop, they're going to do it. And if they think, you know, pushing LGBTQ issues on, I don't know, if they think that using LGBTQ issues to get you to support the CIA is going to work, they're going to do it. And we've seen all these woke recruitment ads. It's not to say that LGBTQ people's struggles don't matter, but we have to be aware of how everything is going to be weaponized. Everything. And controlled opposition is something the ruling class has been doing in this country forever, meaning controlling people who are leftists, socialists, using them to promote non-leftist, non-socialist, destructive ideas. So, yeah. 100% use the Trojan horse, which is also why the world is rejecting LGBTQ movement as a whole, because they know it's the U.S. military. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, is this stuff, like allowing the U.S. military and CIA to push these values on everyone else causes more, you know, homophobia and resistance to it. And, you know, like the Iranian Revolution, we're not just anti-Western exploitation and economic exploitation. We're anti-Western cultural values. You know, we're anti the West imposing, you know, any of their culture on us. And we're for having our own Islamic culture. But Reactionary views are just used to distract from class consciousness. Damn right. I don't know what to make of all this. I just try and do my best to follow the Marxist analytical model used by Domenico Losurdo. Don't we all, Jacob? Aren't we all just trying to use that analytical model? Classic example of pink washing / purple washing. We must support social human rights worldwide, of course. But as communists, our critique must extend to economic rights. The Qatar critique is warranted, but Orientalist. I think you nailed it, Christian. I think you nailed it with that statement, to be honest with you.